Hi everyone, it's Alison from Halton Food, and today we're going to learn about saving tomato seeds. I'm at St. Christopher's Community Garden in Burlington, and we have harvested the very first of our tomatoes. So this is a good sign that we're going to have lots to come. But I also want to get everybody starting to think about how to save your own tomato seeds, because there might be a cultivar that you really love. It's performed like amazingly, very resistant to cracking from like the drought and the heat periods that we've had this summer. Something that you're really proud of, fantastic taste, good amount in your harvest, so you want to plant that next year. Another reason we want to save seeds is for biodiversity. So having the same cultivar in every single garden means it's more susceptible to disease and pests. If one gets affected, they're all going to get affected. So having biodiversity within our crops means that we can compensate in different areas. Perhaps one type of tomato or cherry tomatoes didn't perform, but the Romas are doing fantastic. The next year, it could be the opposite depending on the environmental conditions. So there's a couple of things to consider when saving your tomatoes. So choose the best representation of that crop. That means you want it to be blemish-free, high producer, great taste. I mean, you can save the ones that taste like cardboard if that's your preference. But go for things that are your favorite, but always making sure that they haven't had any disease or pests on them, because the last thing we want is for something to overwinter in our seeds, or perhaps the genetic makeup of that plant, it makes it really susceptible. You don't necessarily want to have that in your garden year to year, because it means that that pathogen is going to be overwintering and constantly infecting your crop. It's not going to have the best chance for survival. So let's look at the tomatoes that we harvested today. When choosing your tomatoes, you need to consider their heritage and genetics. So F1 hybrids, the newer varieties, if you were to save seeds, sometimes they're not viable. They can be sterile. Most of the time they're not going to be the same as their parents because it's the first generation. So we want to stay away from those. What we do want to save seeds from are open pollinated tomatoes. So this means that there have been several generations, of plants grown and seeds saved, and the genetics have really leveled off. There isn't very much variation year after year. It's consistent. Whereas the F1 hybrids, they're gonna have a lot of change year to year because that genetic line isn't yet stable. Another term you're going to hear with tomato enthusiasts are heirloom or heritage tomatoes. Depending on the organization and the person, the meaning can be slightly different, but essentially this means they're open pollinated, so the genetics are stable, but they've been around for around 80 years. So nowadays, believe, because time keeps marching on, pre-World War II, the 40s, we can consider it an heirloom or heritage variety. I like to go with one of the original definitions because this was something that kind of came out in the 60s and 70s, before my time, but pre-1920. It's either like 1950s or 1920s. Right, so enough talking, let's actually get down to this. What do you need in order to save seeds? Well, you're gonna need the tomatoes, check. You're gonna need cutting board, and you're gonna need a knife. Some sort of vessel in which to actually put your seeds. I've got a little compost thing, a notebook. You always want to take notes, especially if you're going to get into like some serious seed saving. I like to use a permanent marker to write notes on the outside of the jars. This comes off with soap and water. Dry erase, not so much. Things always get wiped off, and I'm constantly losing pieces of paper. So I'll write things on the outside here, and then we're going to need some extra water. The method that we're going to use for seed saving is called wet processing or partial fermentation. Essentially what we need to do is we need to cut open our tomato. Remember, we're going to choose the best representation possible, blemish, disease-free, great taste, color. all that jazz. We're going to cut it open. We're going to put our seeds into a jar here, add some water, swish it around, and separate any of the pulp. Put the pulp in our compost, and it can go all the way into our compost over there. And then we're going to let it sit in the water for a couple of days. Typically, I leave it for 3 days. I've forgotten about tomato seeds, left it for 7 days. It was fine. The viable seeds, the ones that we want to collect, they're going to sink to the bottom. The ones that are not viable are going to float to the top. And you'll actually end up with a layer of mold on the top. That is okay. We'll scrape that off, and then we'll put that into the compost. We'll then rinse off the viable seeds, and I always put them on a tray, and there's different methods. So I save seeds and then I will sell them. So I need to make sure that those seeds look perfect. If you put them on paper towel, that is completely fine, except you'll actually have paper towel stuck to your seeds. So if selling the seeds, that doesn't work for the consumer. They want to see something perfect. But for homeowners, you can actually make, it's like tomato seed tape, kind of like, the carrots are along the tape, or the lettuce. You can do it for tomatoes as well. I'll use a tray with parchment paper. I'll write on the paper using my permanent marker, putting notes in my book. Let it dry out, and then Bob's your uncle. Though Brian's actually my uncle. All right, so let's do some seed saving. All right, so it's been 4 days and my tomato seeds have fully fermented. We have taken a little bit of a trek across Ontario from Burlington to my home, but we managed to survive. Done.